I was one of the people at the epicenter of one of the biggest failures in architectural history. The Diorama Tower was a dream building conceived by 11 of America's top architects of the 21st century, but a series of disasters and controversies ended that dream. Well-known controversies included embezzlement, corruption, mafia connections, mistreatment of employees, and the biggest scandal of all, the fall of Robert Yates. The dream building eventually became the building of nightmares, and construction was halted 2 years after construction. Yes, it was a failure, but most of those were not why it was abandoned in the first place. Yates' death was the biggest one, but the reason we decided to stop the construction is what really caused Yates' demise. People die on construction sites often, but this in particular, it's far worse than any other construction-related fatality. Out of the 11 architects, a fellow named Wayne became the first director of the project, and because he was the most successful, the most experienced, and the most well-known of the 11, he naturally became the project's figurehead. His leadership was short-lived because he was discovered embezzling the funds for the project. He was quickly removed from the project even though he was the director. The second director, Stan, was the complete opposite of Wayne. He was pretty new to the world of architectural projects, but what made him the director was the fact that he was a rising star who had built a lot of iconic landmarks in specific cities across the states. Probably not even an exaggeration, but he is the greatest architect ever to set foot in America. Stan also had experience as an accountant, so his financial knowledge would be helpful anyway. Immediately, he would reclaim the embezzled funds by starting a fundraiser and taking some talking to the court, leading the council to keep on investing in the project. Then there was the second problem, where we had decided to build the apartments. It was located at an empty plot of grass that surrounds 4 neighborhoods. While the scenery wasn't a big deal, the problem was that things started to get out of control when children started showing up to see the project and mess around. Yes, that was the problem, children. Because they were children, they have zero ideas of the knowledge and the importance of the building. Not to mention children nowadays are rebellious, violent, and hedonistic. I'm not saying I hate children, but some do really get on my nerves. They are too dumb to live with us and should live somewhere else and not give us a bad time. There was pure silence, except for the machinery noises for the first few days of the construction. When word spread to the residents that we were building a new apartment, people, especially children, started to come nearby, not because they were interested in the construction, but because the place where they used to play soccer was right next to the construction site. Over the past 2 weeks of the project, their soccer balls have entered our site more than 30 times. The last 2 of them have caused major disruption in the construction, causing workers to be pissed. From those 2 incidents, all we discuss at breaks is how horrible kids are. The child we hated the most was the dark-haired boy, whose grimness, terror, and grotesqueness seemed to come straight out of a movie. He looks like a gothic vampire. Therefore, in consultation with the construction site's supervisor and the city council, the 20-meter radius from the construction site was turned into a no-entry zone for non-related personnel. To ensure the kids that this was taken seriously, we have also written that entering this site is essentially trespassing and could lead to being investigated by the cops. It was a good choice because children have stopped disrupting our construction since this rule was implemented. The project seemed to go well without any problems, but of course, there was someone who would ruin everything for the team. That is what exactly happened 4 days after the rule was implemented. During one meeting, Yates, looking out the window while discussing the next steps, suddenly got up and ran outside angrily. When we caught up to him, it was too late. One of the children stepped on the concrete used to create the outliers of the building's area. What makes this different is that this was the first time there was a deliberate sabotage attempt on our construction, not by accident, not a mistake, on purpose. Yates was furious, and it wasn't just the kids he was angry with. He was very frustrated with us. He blamed all of the kids' actions on us, and while we felt insulted, it was something we couldn't deny. For a few days, while we were just focused on the construction work, Yates had been doing many things behind the scenes to prevent things from going wrong by teaching kids about safety hazards, which we all mocked as a waste of time. What did we do when he was trying to prevent this situation? Nothing. The meeting ended in a grim turn as we headed to the damage scene to recover it. Yates promised that he would be here first thing at dawn to keep this construction site contacted by the ruffians, and he would not stop until he sent a legitimate message to the children. We took his words seriously this time, but didn't realize how much of a problem they would cause. That evening, Yates stayed behind to lock all the doors to the construction site, gave the key to the foreman, and while everyone else went to the hotel, he got a room near the construction site, and that was that. We walked into the hotel of Mr. Hamble, who was very kind to us. He and his wife have been running the hotel for 22 years. Mr. Hamble is a man with an unusual past. His father and grandfather were shamans, and he is said to have divine powers. Perhaps his charm drew me in, but I was the closest to him of all the workers at the construction site. While others went to their room at 9 p.m., I used to stay up late, talk to some of his spiritual friends, and discuss the concepts of life and mortality. Over drinks, those of us at the hotel discussed Yates' reaction. Something was off about what he meant by "will not stop." And that night, looking at the ceiling, I thought again. I'm sure people have thought this before, but villains and murder in movies feel embellished because it's entertainment. If you look at movies, there are a lot of villains, from tragic villains like Darth Vader to pure evil like the Joker. We don't feel anything when they kill because it's entertainment, drama, and theater. In real life, it's different. In real life, killing shows the darkest human emotions like fear, hatred, outrage, dismay. What I felt was confusion. Why, Yates? At the construction site, Yates asked us for one favor, in order to be exact. While we were sleeping in the hotel, Yates went out on patrol and fought violently with a shadow that fell upon him. Believing his life was in danger, Yates struck the figure with a nearby brick, killing it. After cleaning himself, he looked at the body with a flashlight and was shocked to see that he had murdered a child. We went where he buried the boy, who looked like a character from one of those gothic movies. His body was as pale as Dracula's, wearing red with a cap on his head, and his eyes were pale as a skeleton. What scared us the most was not his face, but what was surrounding the child's cadaver. Even though he looked like he had died a few hours ago, his body was covered in maggots. I learned that just because you have a lot of muscle doesn't mean you're not scared, as the two biggest guys in the room gagged and Stan cowered. Yates buried the boy again with fear in his eyes, and for some reason, we decided to let him off the hook. Everything would have gotten right if it wasn't that the maggots started to crawl out of the soil into the construction site. Not one or just two, heaps of them, crawling out of the soil like they have risen from the dead. Most of their futile efforts to escape the soil were stopped when we started to stomp on them, and we covered it with rocks, this time in hopes that this would bury the boy in Yates's murder. The maggots kept appearing, and the rocks did not stop the maggots from rising from the underground. If anything, they had grown to a laughably huge amount. In desperation, we decided to remove the rocks from the burial site and now cover them with concrete like Japanese yakuzas. Furthermore, we created a special wooden tool to ensure the concrete is hardened enough for nothing to come from the ground. And they stopped coming out for a while, and the rest of the day was planned, with one exception that we were now antagonizing Yates, who were turning more sensitive, more vile, and more obsessed throughout the day. At the end of the day at the construction site, I decided to take off my gloves and put my boots in storage to change clothes, and I was the last one out on the site, Yates standing at the boy's grave. I turned and saw his expression through the fence, scared, angry, amused, remorseful, or someplace in between. His face was like he was possessed by something. We were all in a construction zone, a no-go zone, and didn't know what was going on outside. The townspeople had realized that the boy Yates had killed was missing, and were conducting a massive search in the city, and the police had already assumed the worst, so they imposed a curfew, and the city, which was normally bustling by 9 o'clock, became a ghost town. We all visited the inn with dreadfulness, and tried to hope for a better tomorrow. Just as I was about to close the door in the room, I saw Yates walking with the innkeeper, as it seemed as if he had borrowed a room. Both men were sweating. The sweat on the men's faces was not the sweat of hard work, but a mixture of fear and dread. From that moment on, I felt something dreadful was about to occur. It was not a dreadfulness of us being in trouble, but the feeling that our days were numbered. And that day has come. That day has sealed the fate of the Diorama Tower. When we entered the construction site, we saw thousands of maggots on the ground with no dirt to stand on, and as we picked them up and walked to the office, the workers groaned as they saw the maggots crawling up their bodies. The site was filled with multiple people shaking themselves to get rid of the maggots who were infiltrating their bodies for survival. Stan opened the office door in a fit of insane bravery, and we dashed into the office before slamming the door shut. When we looked out the window, it looked as if the maggots were coming for us. No, it felt as if they had surrounded us. We all glared at Yates, especially Stan, who was superstitious. He believed that the murder may have cursed the site. Yates was also furious at the sudden blame he got. While the two of them were arguing, some of us grabbed pesticide and started to spray on the maggots. Within minutes, every maggot that was crawling had stopped moving. I took the broom and filled a different hole to put the dead maggots into. As I was cleaning up the maggots, I felt an inexplicable sense of dread that these maggots appearing were now part of a larger whole. The next thing I had to do, since the place was completely clean, was to aid Yates in getting up to the crane, while I also fixed the electrical wires placed on the crane to lighten it in the dark. I took my kit and walked to the elevator, and a minute later I was standing at the topmost part of the city. The reason I got into construction was that I was never afraid of heights, and every time I climbed the top of a crane, I felt such a sense of freedom, relief, and happiness that I quickly forgot about the maggot incident. On the ground below, it made me feel joyful since I saw the morning mist arise from the mountains that surround the construction site like a movie scene. I immediately got to work and started fixing the crane wires. After 10 minutes of silence, Yates suddenly said to me, "I have a feeling that I am not going to make it out of here today." The ominous words broke my concentration, and I glared at Yates. Cut the BS. But what he was saying wasn't BS. It was what everyone was thinking, even me, like something bad would happen to us today. I was concentrating, fixing the wires, when I saw the elevator suddenly go down, and 3 minutes later, a fellow engineer working on the ground came up and said that Stan had assembled all the engineers and asked me to come below. Since I planned to return, I left my tools and followed my engineer buddy to the office. When we did come in, one of the main architects who was working with Stan was talking about the grounds of this construction site. The architect told us to get ready to dig a hole and start setting the building's columns, because now we need to lay the foundation for the building. We're in trouble. The digging would unearth the body of the child we had buried, and the architect, not knowing the truth, would surely call the police on us. Sensing that, Stan told the architect to give us 24 hours to get ready. The architect left, and Stan told us to get the body now. We couldn't hide this anymore, and we also didn't want to go to jail. We now thought of collecting gasoline canisters and pouring them on the ground to dispose of the body. All that was left was to dig the grave again. The boss and 2 other people dug the hole again. At the same time, the rest of us surrounded the hole to ensure nobody was looking at the grave digging process. 10 minutes later, maggots started showing up, and just as we thought we were at the burial ground, one of the architects suddenly gasped, "Blair, where did the body go? We already dug 6 feet under. Where is his body?" "What? 6 feet?" Stan took a measuring tape and calculated the pit's depth, which, as his coworker said, was 6 feet. But there was no sign of the corpse, not even a bone of the boy, only maggots, and it wasn't possible for the corpse to rot completely for days. As we were looking at each other confused, Yates screamed from the top of the crane, and when we looked up, he was backed into a corner to the edge of the crane. Above him was a small creature dressed in red, wearing a cap, the child who died on the construction site days ago by him. Unbeknownst to him, the screams were coming toward us, and Yates was falling from the crane like a twisted puppet. When I looked up again, there was no sign of the boy, but others were moaning as they did see what I saw. The dead boy was at the top of the crane, and that is supposed to be in the hole. Yates' body fell to the ground. His life ended there, and so did the fate of the Diorama building. They all ran away from the construction site when Yates fell and died. His blood was spilling on a concrete table shaped like an altar, his body lying mangled next to it. The construction was halted there, and no one has returned to the site, and I suspect some people have been so horrified that they will never return to the city. Yates' death was labeled an accidental death, but we all know that it was a death sentence. I left the construction board and prepared to go to another city to find other work, and the day I was about to leave the hotel, Mr. Hamble asked to speak to me for the last time. I followed him to his office, where Mr. Hamble looked very depressed. He told me he was thinking of taking a long vacation and leaving the country for a while, and he decided to tell me his friend. When I asked him why, he told me he had learned that his son had died. I first sat down and held his hand to comfort him, and as I hugged him, I looked at the photo behind him. Mr. Hamble was with his wife and son in front of an amusement park, the child we buried looking very happy. Mr. Hamble asked me if he would visit me sometime in the city, and I replied yes. I don't think I'll ever see Mr. Hamble again.